Yeah.
I will set it in PowerPoint motion, just 1 minute. It always happens that it doesn't work. Yeah. Okay, got it. Do I need to ask, got it, or do you all get this sign of that the meeting is recorded? Because now it's in my screen. Okay, well, then it's fine. Well, as you're able to read, I'm not a member anymore of the Open University. Today it's my last working day of the Open University of the Netherlands, because I completely shift to the University of Applied Sciences, namely NHL Stenden. The research I'm going to speak about for about 15 minutes has been conducted at the Open University by a student I was supervising. So the setup of the meeting, as far as I'm concerned, would be a welcome and introduction. Well, that's what we've had so far. A short presentation on a group concept mapping study. And since there are both researchers and practitioners in the room, I tried to find a balance between, let's say, the technicalities of the research part and the practical aspects of what are we able to do with these results. I tried to, well, I came up with a session, breakout room sessions, a short exercise, but since we are a small group, it's also able, we can do it in a plenary group as well as I'm concerned. So I prepared some questions to speak about.
Migchiel, a short interruption. I only see your sheet 1. I'm not sure where you are.
Oh.
So have you moved sheet? Because I'm still with sheet 1. Okay,
well then I think this works, right? Now you're able to see the setup.
Now I see your second one, yeah.
Yeah, okay, then I'll reduce.
Yeah. Perfect, thanks.
Well, the only disadvantage is now you will have a look at click on text toe te voegen and so, because otherwise in the presentation modes it disappears, but okay. So this is the setup of the meeting. Well, who am I? I worked as a researcher at the Open University. It's good to bear in mind that I'm an educational scientist and that researching in the mentoring field is actually something that I appreciate and like, but it's not my core business. My core business is related to doing research in design-based education, where also guidance is part of it. So, the topic of this presentation is basically about good quality mentoring. We've undertaken a group concept mapping study about mentor and mentees conceptions towards good quality mentoring. So basically we try to gain insight in the beliefs of both mentors and mentees related to good mentoring. And I try to demonstrate that group concept mapping studies might be a nice approach to use and to explore these beliefs. Well, there are of course many studies undertaken into the effects of mentoring and mentoring programs, but well, I've been at previous summits, and it was also always a discussion about what is the value of these results and how can they be improved, and can we fulfill our promises, and to what extent can we make clear what our contribution is. So I thought, at least in this study, we wondered, can these generic features of, for example, meta reviews be translated to specific contexts? And what also was striking is that what can be seen as good mentoring was oftentimes defined as effective mentoring, and sometimes also by researchers and not that much by practitioners, but yeah, this is my impression at least. So there was a starting point for our study, and that's why we tried, okay, let's try to gain insight in knowledge and insights of the beliefs of mentors and mentees. That brings us to the question of what are these beliefs actually? And also we focused, and that's important to bear in mind, we focused on the domain of secondary vocational education and training programs in the Netherlands. So it was an educational context basically. So in this occasion, students between the age of 16 or 17 years and sometimes 30 years were included in this study. So that's the context actually. Sylvia, I saw that someone is popping up. You managed that, right? Okay. Well, I already spoke about a mixed method approach in the group concept mapping studies. I think you're all familiar with the techniques used in group concept mapping, but perhaps you don't call it in this way. So group concept mapping is basically about formulating a thesis where you can brainstorm about and generate ideas, like you put it on post-its or something. Then we collect the post-its, we try to cluster the post-its in groups, and we use a software which calculates actually how each individual is grouping these post-its, and that's basically the essence of this methodology. So in other words, in preparation phase, we come up with a nice thesis. In this occasion, good quality mentoring entails ... So mentors and mentees were asked to add this sentence, and good to bear in mind that each sentence or each idea counts. So it's not about how much times something is mentioned about, but about the scope and the broadness. So each idea was included in the brainstorm phase. Then you have the idea synthesis. That's basically clustering and bring it together. And in the third phase, we actually ask to all respondents, to what extent do you agree with this statement? So all the statements that are generated and collected are also translated into a so-called questionnaire, and where you can ask, okay, to what extent is this relevant for you, or to what extent is this feasible for you? Then respondents need to respond on a scale from 1 till 5. And in our occasion, we also asked for relevance and feasibility. So yeah, that just in a snapshot, this methodology. Well, in this study, 82 mentors and mentees were included in the brainstorm sessions. We organized 8 online brainstorm sessions to generate the statements. So that's basically stage 1. Stage 2, where we go to the grouping of the statements. 19 mentors and mentees were included, and actually it was an online exercise where all participants performed the task on their own. So the software facilitates it. And that's the second stage. And then the third stage, where we asked mentors and mentees to basically score all statements. 65 mentors and mentees were involved. And basically in all 3 stages, there were an equal contribution of mentors and mentees. Not completely equal, but at least between the 40 and 60% always. So and then for the data analysis, this is perhaps more interesting for the researchers, I'm not sure, but we used a multidimensional scaling. That's an analysis technique to see how strong clusters are, what the qualities of the clusters are, and we used a sort of a clustering technique to decide upon which group of clusters we needed to use. Well, at least an important indication was the clusters should be meaningful, content-wise. Now we have a look at the results. What you see here is just bullets, but each bullet represents a statement. And what this slide demonstrates is actually there is a good fit, which basically says that we're able to use this data in a way. Now we become the more interesting part, I guess. So far it has been just background, and I need to say that it has been a study which is performed in Dutch, so I needed to translate the labels into English. What you see over here is actually all these statements that were shown on the previous slide, but then with the clustering techniques. So basically, here are groups of clusters, and these clusters are labeled content-wise. So, for example, the first cluster, which is called interpersonal communication, what is a group of clusters that we can be, which are basically related to this topic. The second group is about basic interaction skills. So these groups, they relate to each other in a content way. The third group is about reciprocal expectations. So that has also to do with, let's say, the relational aspect of mentoring, but more related to the responsibility part of it. Then we have conditional aspects of mentoring, for example, time or opportunity, frequency of meetings, and so on. Then we have the objectives of mentoring and the content, for example, contributing to entrepreneurial skills or whatsoever. Then we have statements related to the role, which is group 6. And what became apparent is that 5 of these 6 clusters can be seen as consistent. So that means that all mentors and mentees basically sorted this cluster in a consistent way. The only cluster that came out as being somewhat inconsistent was the cluster related to conditional aspects, so cluster 4. So basically that's cluster care, if we're going to interpret the content of it. So lots of numbers on this slide, but we of course we try to calculate something about these clusters. And so, for example, with respect to interpersonal communication, the students and the mentors and the mentees calculated it as relevant because they gave it a 4, basically. The same went for basic interaction forms, also a 4. Mutual expectations 3. So what you basically see here is that most clusters are calculated as important by mentors and mentees. And actually, with respect to feasibility, the most things are basically can also be seen as relevant and feasible. The only clusters that somewhat drop to the lower rates are conditional aspects and mutual expectations. So which is can be seen as, we can debate about it, how come. So what you see here is a visual, and I'm sorry, it's again in Dutch, but to the left part, basically the groupings are headed with respect to relevance. So you see 4.20 and 3.50 there, and then you see in colors basically the groupings. So on the top, it's about interaction forms, which was seen as most relevant, and then the interpersonal communication, which can be seen as somewhat less relevant, the role of the mentor, and the objectives. And the lower we get, we come to reciprocal expectations and the conditional aspects. And if we look at feasibility, well, again, the same is feasible, like the basic forms are there on top. And then we go to the role of the mentor. So there's a deviation between how relevant it is and how feasible it is. So that's of course input for what would we like to improve. So in this sense, we can give you some insight in how mentors and mentees basically perceived the relevance and the feasibility of different aspects. Some people are really looking into the screen and are somewhat looking difficult now and then.
I think, Migchiel, we will need some of the statements to understand the groups, because otherwise it's so abstract.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, but I gave some examples already, so I think it's also a little difficult to give a right impression in a 50 minutes presentation, because there's much content behind it. But I agree with you. So I try to make it more clear now. So also here you see a mapping of the clusters within and now I can give examples because I will switch to another screen. What you see here is all the statements clustered with respect to feasibility and relevance. So not the clusters, the groupings of statements, but the individual statements. And here in the top of it, there's basically the green zone. that can be seen as relevant and feasible. The blue zone can be seen as less relevant, less feasible. So this gives insight in what to prioritize when improving. I'm not sure whether this will be feasible for you now. Do you see my word screen?
No.
No, because I collected all statements of the blue zone and the green zone in another document, just to give you insight in what comes out of it. And I expect I expect that will give more impression of the content. So let me finish this presentation first, and then we can go to the statements if you want, if you like. Yeah. So, and what became obvious is, I can't, just 1 minute, is that in the green zone there were no statements from the cluster mutual expectations and conditional aspects, but in the blue zone they were. So that's yeah, that was striking basically. And in the green zone, most statements related to being personal and the relationship aspects were there. So I thought that was a striking finding. Well, we also split the perception of mentors and mentees, and there were no significant differences in how mentors and mentees perceived the feasibility and relevance of statements. So some conclusions, again carefully, but I think as far as I can oversee literature and the student as well, basically the clusters of interpersonal and basic interaction forms were found important, but that can be found in literature as well. So establishing a good relationship is of course essential. Mutual expectations and also refers to a relational aspect of mentoring, and it's that this part can also be found in literature as well. The cluster related to the content and objectives of mentoring has oftentimes been mentioned in literature as being important. So in that sense, study confirms a lot of what is already known. If that's the only thing, I'm not sure, because what does this study add? Well, first, a confirmation of what we know from the literature. But what we also do is additional information on what is seen as relevant and feasible before, for example, perhaps it's even personal before the responsible part of mentoring, but also we find what has not been mentioned. For example, involvement of parents has oftentimes been mentioned in literature as important in for establishing quality in mentoring, but in this study it was not brought to the fore by mentors and mentees. And also the involvement of the mentee in itself, of how a relationship is organized, has not been mentioned. So in that sense, I think this study might shed some new light on things. Although, we must of course carefully interpret all the information. It's still it's research into a specific context, and you cannot generalize these findings. So, and if these statements are still way too abstract, and if you find it difficult to grasp the content of these clusters, I will stop sharing, and then I will share my other screen and try to give you an impression of the statements that were found in the blue zone and in the green zone. And I think that might add to your image. Let's see if it works. And to be honest, this has been the translations have been made by a, how do you call it, a machine. So sometimes the meaning gets a little lost due to the translation, I guess. But what you see here is this Word document visible for you?
Yes.
Okay. So what you see here is statements from the blue zone. And so and basically there are a few 5-6 words which were added to the sentence. Good quality mentoring entails blah blah blah. For example, commitment to each other. So these statements that are written here were seen as less relevant and less feasible. It's a bit difficult for me to get an impression of how this lands because I do not see you, but
let us just go through it quickly, Migchiel. Give us a sec.
Yeah.
So as you said, these are less relevant and less feasible.
Yes.
Okay. So the statements came from mentors and mentees.
Yes.
They were the ones, they said, the mentors mentees said these are all part of a good mentoring relationship. But when they had to score it, it was not as highly scored as the rest. Can you also show the highly scored statements?
Yeah, that's what you see here. Basically, these statements, the green lighted statements, were seen as more relevant and more feasible. So, for example, a good click or fit between mentor and mentee, being open to each other, setting goals, creating safety, being the motivational aspect, accept each other. So.
Okay.
Yeah, shall I stop sharing the screen? Okay.
And what were the things that mentors and mentees thought were completely irrelevant? Was there also part that they thought unimportant, completely unimportant?
No, most aspects have been scored between 3.5 or 3.3 and 5. So so in that sense, less relevant is also relative.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah, I can imagine that you have, well, it's an overload of information in this 15 minutes, and you need to grasp it a little, and it's always difficult to give a sufficient image of the content of these clusters. And that's why I gave you some examples of, let's say, the both zones, the blue zone and the green zone, just to give you an impression of what was seen as relevant, more relevant and more feasible. There's already a question, Sylvia.
Go ahead, Joshua.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was really interesting. My question was how the headings for the clusters were defined. So yeah. how that became the cluster headings, please.
That's a good question. Well, we used software, group concept mapping systems, and the software makes suggestions based upon the frequency of the words the respondent used. However, that's still, how do you call it? It's based upon the wordings, and it's not always representative of the content of a cluster. So what we did was using the suggestions of the software and then reasoning backwards to the actual content of the clusters, and then see whether it was fitting or not. And actually, oftentimes we came up with different labels, and these labels have been discussed with a selection of the, let's say, the participants and also between the researchers. So it was based upon consensus, actually.
Right, thank you for that.
Okay. Ula?
Thank you so much. Sorry if I missed at the beginning, but can you please characterize again who the mentees and mentors were in this research? Are they?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that's a good question as well. But the mentors are basically people related to the mentoring programs, oftentimes which much practical professional experience. And well, Marleen is in, so perhaps she's better able to explain than me. But the different programs had a slightly different setup. But in principle, I would argue it as this. We had also a program where they used they used peer mentors, I guess. So that's of course a bit confusing, the how do you call it, the response. And with respect to the mentors, basically that we used a selection criteria related to age. So we only included students that were 17 years or older. And I guess the eldest one was 30, and and the other criterion was they should be able to actively formulate ideas about and explicate ideas about good mentoring. So for example, a student, a refugee who was unable to speak the Dutch language was unfortunately not included because there were language issues, so to say.
Okay, so in my words, Migchiel, what is innovative in this research is that you guys collected, let's say, 100 statements that were delivered by mentors and mentees that they call this good mentoring. When I take a look at these statements, I mean, I see them and I remember somehow that I remember these dots, that there were one of the statements, for example, like have regular meetings with the staff of a mentoring program or have a training, that they were all scored very low. So I thought that the scoring of these statements was very different than what I would have thought, that the circumstances were less important for them than what is happening in the relationship, of course.
But that also came out of this study.
What else can we do with these 100 statements? Because it's the first time we see how mentors and mentees value mentoring. What is, according to them, the value or the good mentoring? What can we do with this?
Well, if you look at the content, I think it's an indication of how mentors and mentees perceive different aspects related to quality. So, for example, the personal aspect is in this occasion the most important. The responsibility aspect of the relationship, namely committing to mentoring and so on, and is important but less important in this study. And the conditional aspects, well, I would say that is of minor importance because it's all just, how do you call it, 3.5 or something. But there's a difference in it. So that's already a way to look at quality. So if you would like to make work of how do you call it, quality thinking in your program, I think this is a way to prioritize. And the same goes with all these statements in the plot. I think that gives insight in where you are able to work on. For example, if you'd like to organize a professionalization course, okay, where should it be about? That gives insight. And the other addition can be that, well, it's in innovation literature. It's quite well known that professionalization or making work of improvements do not work if you do not take into account the beliefs of mentors and mentees. Because if you do not take it into account and if you do not address it, at least in conversations, innovations oftentimes won't work. And that's also a way to look at these data, because they are actually a reflection of beliefs of the mentors and mentees. And if you would like to, it's not unfixable or it's a starting point. And so I think, so suppose you give an assignment to someone, to a coordinator, or at least to yourself to make work of it. It can be an ideal starting point for a conversation about where to focus upon, right? So that's, and what you can do with it. Well, I think undertaking this study in itself is actually quite a useful learning experience, because what is happening is that you're explicating your thoughts and beliefs about what is quality. And it's a reflection in itself. And going one step further, what you see here is almost a shared frame of reference, not by each individual, but by the group. So, and that's another advantage. If you would like to innovate your program or whatsoever, it's oftentimes a normative discussion, right, about what is good mentoring, etc. And this is a way to avoid it a little and start by visualizing it. So I think it's a good starting point as well. And another point is your question basically turns up the whole discussion, because I would like to have this discussion in a group, but that's not a problem. I can answer it. And another advantage is you could, so for example, this questionnaire, it has not been validated and checked upon reliability or something, but what we do over here in my new work is we also we use this methodology, and then we set goals with teacher teams, and then we use it to follow up. And so all these statements can also be used as a way of monitoring certain aspects. So that's also an angle to take. Yeah. So
perhaps
yeah.
if I could just add something about the target group for you guys. So it was 3 VET schools participating in this, right? 16 plus. The age group was 16 plus. And the mentors were also very diverse, because these 3 mentoring programs were really different.
Yep.
And our mentoring program was one of them. So I thought, these 3 programs are so different. I'm sure I will not recognize half of the statements. The opposite. I took a look at the statements with my colleagues, and we were like, it's as if everybody's talking about our own mentoring program. So the statements people were giving were really recognizable, at least for ourselves. And that's when I thought, oh, okay, this is interesting. And what also made me very interested in this stuff, although the technical part of it is really complicated for me, Migchiel, when you talk about this whole process of the group.
I can imagine, yeah.
Okay, that's really research. That's okay. Yeah. But anyhow, Mar and Peter follow it. What really appeared to me is that when, if you remember the presentation of, gosh, I forgot his name, from the United States at the summit. What's his name?
Sam.
Right.
And what was
Mcquillan.
Mcquillan, yeah.
Right. Samuel gave a presentation also where he was also talking about quality. And you guys know that in the United States, they use that very thick handbook, Elements of Effective Practice. And he said that he counted it. He said, how many aspects in the Elements of Effective Practice talk about the relationship out of the, 60 statements? He said something like 5. So I was also shocked by that. And then when I see these statements that people spoke about what is good mentoring, I think 95% is about the relationship itself. So that's why when Migchiel was done with this, I was thinking, right, what can we do with this as a mentoring program? So if I hear you correctly, Migchiel, you say use this as a starting point for conversations with your team.
Yeah, the same goes with actually what can be done is what happens here, because you're basically reflecting upon the content as a participant. And what I learned from this study is that it's difficult for now, may I use the word practitioners to follow up on it, because there's lots of content in it, and that's something that is not found in literature. So basically, if you would like to use it, I think I should be involved to help you take a step, because and what happens here is that you try to make meaning of the content, and that's actually what can be done within the programs, because it's like you say, you put the data into perspective. That's what happens here. Okay. And I think that's an important step. And actually, it's helpful for me as well, because I always thought the diversity of the program is an issue, because I need to publish, right? So that's another interest I have. And I thought, well, this group is way too diverse to publish. But you turn it around, you say, well, despite this diversity, we actually recognize the similarities. And well, that's of course also a way to look at it. Yeah, so that's, yeah, Marleen?
Yeah. What I thought also very interesting is that the participants, the mentees and the mentors are so much involved on what is happening and what are the researchers doing with the results. They were, together with the researchers, making clusters.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a way that all the participants realize more and also are going to change that. Maybe some mentees will be mentors later on.
Yeah.
And mentors will be more often mentors. So they also are going to think better and better, what are they doing? Because they were so much involved in all the steps in this way, in the way of researching.
Well, yeah, that's I think that's, well, glad that you confirmed this element of the methodology, because it's indeed, it's very participatory actually, because and that's a characteristic, and the idea is that it also is a learning experience for the participants, and that's what you bring to the table now. And so for the others, I didn't want to say it because oftentimes, well, research is anonymous, but we have some participants here in the group. And so Marleen and well, and also Sylvia, her team were involved. So yeah, so but that's indeed a characteristic. So thanks for the addition.
So one of
May
the
I?
major messages is involve mentees in how mentoring is organized. Peter, react, please.
Yeah, well, just two things. The first is, if I can summarize, then you are saying actually the relationship is most important and conditional aspects are of less important. That's what I hear. I don't know if this is correct, I guess. Yeah. So my first is just a thought is that, do these results hold in different contexts, different forms of mentoring? So I think this is an interesting question.
Yeah.
If I look at my own team, is, for example, mentoring to work, and it's quite goal oriented. I don't know what the programs are here. Is it more relationship oriented or more goal oriented? So I think if you have more goal oriented programs, you might have different results. I don't know, but you might have different results. If you see, for example, in mentoring to work, the expertise of a mentor is really important. So it's not only about the relationship as such, but also about having expertise. So I'm curious to repeat this research in other contexts. I think it will be of added value.
Well, to reply to your statement, I think your summary of the results is basically how I read the results as well, with the nuance that the clustering of the conditional aspects was somewhat less reliable. So that's one. And the second thing is, I think your remark about how is it then in other contexts is very important, because this is just a small context with, let's say, I would say they're rather, I think you're right about the goal directedness of the programs. That is less the case, I would say. So that's already an argument for your plea, or so that's, I think I agree with you, basically.
And it would be interesting to have all the statements. Work together to do it in other contexts. It would be nice to do that.
Yeah.
And a second, it's, well, the results are not really good news for mentoring organizations, of course, because why? Because it's easy to intervene in conditional aspects, but it's not easy to intervene in a relationship. So if you talk about quality, how can you intervene within the relationship? So as a mentoring organization, it's more difficult than saying we have to meet every 2 times a week or for 6 months or whatever. So that's just a thought. And Adding to that, maybe we have to see these conditional aspects as a condition for a good relationship, and we have to see them in relation to each other, and not as just on the same level. So it's a kind of related to. First, you have the conditions. For example, if you have the matching, if you have the matching, it's the organization who matches the mentee and the mentor, and then you have like an organizational aspect. And if this is not well done, well, you don't have a good relationship. So, and maybe it's something what mentees and mentors, if you ask them, it's not top of their mind because they are matched and the match is good. So it's not on top of their mind of saying, oh, yeah, well, the organization that is doing a good match is very important.
Well, it's of course a reflection.
It's a reflection
of the mentors and mentees. Oh, sorry. And in that sense, the conditions are less on their mind, indeed, I would say. Yeah, if you suggest a certain order in the thinking, well, that might be the case, but that's not the case in this in this study for the mentors and mentees. So then a conversation should actually start to help people become more aware. At least that's what I would suggest to form. But yeah, thank you, Peter. There's another question. I can't. Victoria?
Just to continue with this idea, I think that it was an element that was identified high important and really effective. That is the good click between the mentees and the mentors. And here we have maybe also the assignation result. No, we cannot separate the good quick of the process and the criteria and the knowledge that the technical team have about these persons to try to look for this check. No? I think that maybe the mentees and mentors language is different about the technical language. Precisely. And we can find some elements that we just put different concept, but we are talking about the same. Thank you for the presentation. I think it's really interesting. We also think that it's really important to focus in the quality relationships. Maybe I think it will be really interesting to cross this point of view of the mentees and mentors with technical point of view, because I think maybe, and what Peter's also, I think it was saying is there's some elements that mentees and mentors maybe are conscious about, like the abilities or the previous work and process that has been before start the relationships, that for us is also determining in the quality of relationships. And I agree also that it will be really interesting to in the selection of participants to take maybe also different context of programs, to take a look at these common elements. If there is for the coordinadora, we think or we just defend that there is common elements in these quality relationships in different contexts, and I think it will be really interesting to make also a cluster investigation, taking different context and making this the cluster variable. Excuse me for my English. Okay. And also to make the selection to the mentees and mentor participant, it maybe will be interesting to take on consideration the successful or not successful relationships in terms of scope results. And not to have also this idea that to compare what happens in a relationship that has scope the results of the program, and the relationships that doesn't do it. No.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Your English is perfect, because I guess I understand everything, so that's good. It's very, very functional. Thank you. I'm not sure I need to respond or, yeah.
Oh, as we feel, so
Well, actually, I agree. That's all I can say. So yeah.
Okay, I would like to just make one note, is that actually regarding to this topic that has been discussed on the insights that the mentees and mentors have on the organizational part, this is something that we actually put emphasis on in this introductory part of explaining them actually how it happens and what we take into consideration and everything. And we notice that when we do this, when we put this emphasis on the organizational part, they do recognize and they actually mention the importance of the matching. They make these comments or not sometimes, but yeah, fortunately normally we have some success on this, so we notice this recognition. And one other thing that I would like to ask actually is that I find this so useful to actually these questions and these areas of quality measurement would be and it would be so useful if we could have access more or less to these questions, because I believe that it would be a really good input for us as organizations to actually be able to measure these impact and the quality of the perception of the quality that mentors and mentees have. So if we could have yes, further on access to these questions, so we could improve also our research, like our questionnaires on the quality. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you. This is a nice compliment. So basically you consider it as a source of inspiration.
Yes, definitely. Yes. So
okay.
Thank you for the, the insights and learnings on this workshop. And yeah, if it would be possible, but.
Sure. What we could do, Migchiel, is that we place the PowerPoint and the word list, because the research was in Dutch. I don't think that makes you happy, Joanna, but we could, the PowerPoint and the word list, we could still place and share with people, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I need to consider. Yeah, that's yeah, of course, that's fine.
Sure.
I just want to make one remark, because I'm from the educational theory, and their quality is always seen as very relative. It's basically in the eye of the stakeholder, how you have a look at it and how things are attained and perceived. There's always a discrepancy between it. So I think what I hope at least is that, well, we learn with each other a bit more about the perceptions of our mentors and mentees, and that we can't ignore them. We should use it as a starting point for further development. That's at least my plea. How you would like to use it, that's a different way, of course. But well, that's at least what I would like to bring to the fore during this meeting. So thank you.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you, Migchiel. I think it's also very much in line to what everybody in this community has been saying in the past year. Like we think of our work as something really, a lot of details and a lot of complications, but it's important to keep repeating that it's about what the core of it is, and that's what you point out to us again, the perspective of the people themselves. Any final comments? Joanna, perhaps you can mute it, because I don't. Okay. Any final comments from Joshua or Joke, Edith, Marisa? Oh, Ula, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that when I started our mentoring program and mentees and mentors are very different from your group. But when I was reading this machine translation of statements, I thought that I was reading our, at the end of the program evaluation statements that people put. And this is open question where they just write like what was important, what they liked in the mentoring program. And the many statements were exactly the same.
Wow.
So I was just surprised, really surprised by that.
Oh, good, Ula, thanks. Marisa? Oh, sorry, Migchiel.
Well, it also says something about the value of my research data, which is another role I have, a researcher. So that's good. Thank you. Well, but it's of course not, that's not the impact you would like to have. So I'm glad that it's recognizable. Thank you.
Marisa?
Hello, sorry for my participation in delay, but I would like to thank Migchiel for the presentation. It's a very different job from ours, because we used to make quantitative research, and so interesting to see a different prospect of studying the qualitatives. So it was very interesting.
Thank you.
True. Yeah, I agree. Okay, guys, it's 4:01. Shall we do Dutch and be on time? Okay, so any other comments, wishes?
Yeah, just to wish. Yeah, I hope the list is shared. The statements with the statements.
Yeah.
I would like to take a close look at them, to be honest.
Yeah, and Migchiel, you also made a remark that you are open to be involved in the next step, in the sense of what we do with this data. So perhaps it's possible to organize a brainstorm session with these people or people in this member community on how to use this data.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's discuss this in due time.
Okay, so that means not next month. Very clear, very clear. No, don't worry, Migchiel, don't worry. Okay, thank you guys for being here. And then email me or call me if you want to join the Brussels events or any other questions. Otherwise, we see each other next month in the next online workshop. Migchiel, loads of thanks for doing this.
Okay, thank you, and see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.